Yeah, so if like it's between two consenting adults, then it's not an ideal world. So we all have to know that we are taking risks.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren and I'm 23 this year.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicholas. I'm 26 this year.
Hi everyone, I'm Gracia. I'm 19 this year.
Hi everyone, I'm Ryan and I'm 24 this year.
Hi everyone, I'm Bryan and I'm 22 this year.
Consent is bounded by age.
I was thinking of this question like specifically in the context of a recent influencer saga. So in that context, I felt like you cannot really blame him fully because we live in a capitalistic society, right? So you come into a transaction with each other. So even though age is a very important factor, right? But 15 years old, I feel is a valid enough age to make rational choices and decisions. So I feel like only for those that like ultimately saw what he sent and like rejected it and reported it to the police, I feel like that's not very applicable to them.
I agree to a certain extent with what you say, but the reason why I agree that consent is bounded by age is because when you are a minor, you are still highly impressionable, because when you're put in that situation at that certain age and you're offered something that you currently do not have, a large amount of money, a certain favor to do a certain thing, then your judgment wouldn't be as experienced as someone else who is mature.
Ideally, people who are matured should be able to give consent. So I think 18 is an alright age, but if you drag it to a far end of the spectrum, or even younger, a minor, there's a gray area where the macro side of things, government cannot account for every single individual. So personally, it was interesting for me to realize from the saga that 16 and above can give consent, but they cannot be paid for it until they reach 18.
I think why there's a so-called age restriction on consent is actually because like there's a sort of a standard placed upon you, right? That when you're 18 years old, you actually have the mental capacity, have enough sort of IQ and EQ to actually know what you want or what you don't want from life. That being said, I think there should be some exceptions for like people who actually show exceptional levels of maturity, be in their actions or in their words, or exceptional levels of naivety, right? Because like Ryan said, everyone tends to mature at different ages, and that's why I somewhat agree.
From my personal experience, I didn't make very wise decisions when I was 16 and below. So I would say, of course, after the saga, I did some mini research myself. And I understand that those age 16 and below, whatever consent they give is actually not valid according to the law. So I would say that it actually makes some sense because I really made very, very bad decisions. So I believe at that age, money is a very important thing for us. So if you actually take up money to entice these people who are in their secondary school, most likely they'll just consent to it.
In a Tinder hookup, a victim who consented should bear responsibility for the outcome.
Well, let's say you agree to hook up with someone on Tinder and you realize that this person maybe wasn't very truthful about maybe his sexual health, then yes, it is the person's fault for not being very honest. But having consented to it, you must be able to still, consider these consequences and still take responsibility for this.
I mean, nobody, you wouldn't have known that the person had STD or not. So that is technically out of your control, and I feel that they should not bear the full responsibility of that outcome because it wasn't what you had in mind in the first place.
Specific to this context, okay, really just specific to this context, because I believe there are other situations where victims shouldn't even bear any responsibility. But in this specific context, of course, this person shouldn't be blamed entirely because he or she wasn't aware of the entire truth. But when you put yourself in that situation and you say yes to it, it is not entirely coercive from the start.
So emphasis should be placed on knowledge. If you know that this person perhaps had STD and you still wanted to go along with it, then I feel that, yeah, you should bear the responsibility of it. But if you didn't really know, I feel shouldn't be your responsibility. Yeah.
Because that's not what you technically agreed to, right? It was one of the so-called implied terms.
I'm doing it based on the concept of like conditional agreement. So like I agreed to these terms of having like hook up with you based on the agreement of not knowing that the person has an STD. So it's like, if the person actually has an STD but it conceals the fact, then I feel like that's a breach of consent already.
Personally, just to me, I think it's reasonable for people to actually assume that the party that they're hooking up with actually is clean, actually won't transmit any STDs to them. I think this is a reasonable assumption to make, and that's why maybe personally to me, I think the point at which this isn't disclosed, right? I think it's pretty unfair, because like you are misleading someone into doing something they might not necessarily consent to.
I believe that things out there are complicated.
Yeah.
So a lot of times things happen because people assume. So to prevent this assumption from happening, you should be responsible as a consenting adult and think through the consequences. Like, you cannot expect someone else to protect you if you can't even protect yourself.
Yeah, this is where maturity comes into place. So if like it's between two consenting adults, then it's not an ideal world. So we all have to know that we are taking risks.
Correct.
So
But that being said, I'm not trying to victim shame, and I believe in certain situations victims should be given that kind of protection. But specific to this situation, must give disclaimer. I don't want to get cancelled.
No, it's important.
Asking for consent once is sufficient.
So basically for this, it depends on the situation also. So for example, if it's something related to work, for example, if you sign the consent one time, I think that's sufficient. But for example, if it's in a sexual relationship, I would also say that one is enough. But if you keep asking, I'm pretty sure you'll spoil the mood. But then again, yes, during the process, it's a bit uncomfortable. Yes, definitely you need to ask more than one time.
For me, I agree with like Nicholas that like in the sexual perspective, like consent given once is definitely not enough. Especially if you are a virgin, right? So if I give you consent to take my virginity, but being a virgin, like it's going to hurt a lot, right? So if I suddenly withdraw my consent, I feel like my consent should be taken into account, and the guy does not have the right to continue the procedure because it is hurting me, and I feel like my consent is withdrawn.
I feel it's always better to keep asking not in an irritating way, of course. Yeah, to keep asking whether the person is like okay with this, okay with that. You may not know if suddenly the person feels uncomfortable with it halfway through, and then they just want to stop. So it doesn't hurt to take the better step and be slightly more concerned.
So to add on to what Ryan said earlier, because if a person keep asking me whether I really consent to it, I'll start to think whether this person is actually being legit or not. Is he like being unbelievable that actually I consent to it? So I will have second thoughts when you keep asking also.
Wouldn't second thoughts be good here though? As in if it actually facilitates so-called better decision making lah.
I feel like it reflects like the concern that you guys have also, because like you're not just driven by impulse, you're also taking into consideration like the other party's feelings by asking them if they're okay and observing whether they're actually fine with it. Yeah, so I don't think it'll be a turn off for the mood.
Right, so when I say somewhat agree, right, I'm operating from the POV that these people actually know what they're consenting to. So like, to me, insofar as the terms that are agreed on are actually clear at the point at which you actually ask for consent, I think that's okay, right? I think asking once is okay. If the terms change, then that's when I'm like, yeah, sure, ask again, right? But I think the terms should be very clear.
I feel that in terms of consent, there are many different forms of consent. There is the yes, I agree, and there is also body language. By body language, I don't mean physical arousal, because there are scenarios where people try and justify that, this person was very sexually aroused, but that is purely physical. So I believe that the reason why consent needs to be consistently assessed, not directly asking, hey, are you okay with this? And then 5 minutes later, hey, are you okay with this again? It's more of like, I ask you first, and then if you're okay with it, and then during the whole entire process, of course, you continually monitor whether do you feel that this person is pushing you away?
Thank you for watching this episode of SG Layers. What are your thoughts about consent? Is it something that's difficult to navigate?
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to press the subscribe button to stay notified when we upload a new episode. See you next week.